everybody, Darren from the White Hatter here, and thank you for tuning in to another opportunity to talk to another subject matter in this field of social media and digital literacy in the online world. And you know, over the past couple of weeks, I had Wayne from Ireland, I had Alan from Great Britain, and today I brought in Leonie Smith. And Leonie is from Australia. Woo! It's kind of a Commonwealth theme that I've been doing over the past little while. And Leonie is a subject matter expert out of Australia, and she has her own website, which is really cool, which is Cyber Safety Lady. There's her link. It'll also be in the link of the video that we're going to be sharing with everybody. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to bring Leonie into the conversation. So there she is. I'll have her wave. Hey, Leonie, how you doing?
Hey.
Excellent. And so
Nice
maybe you can share with everybody who you are, what's your background, and just everything about yourself.
Oh, that's a tall order. Okay, so I'm Leonie Smith. I have two stepchildren that are now adults. One is 36, the other one's 33, and I have two sons still living at home at uni that are 23 and 19. And quite a few years ago, I decided to start up this cyber safety business that I have in 2011 after I was actually working in social media training. And I found that a lot of the people that I was training, particularly women of a certain age getting back into business, doing small business, had absolutely no concept of online safety or security. So I would forcibly make them do a cyber safety course. It's only a couple of minutes, and teach them things like password security and all sorts of stuff like that. And more people started asking me questions about that because there was nobody around doing it at the time. In this country, there was no one who was teaching anyone that sort of stuff. And, of course, it's very, very different now. So I started a YouTube channel to help people. I started a blog to help people. And then I started getting asked to come and talk. And right now, up until the COVID-19 situation, I was spending a lot of my working time helping people online and going around the country, mainly talking in schools to students, parents, teachers, doing some corporate training as well about the ordinary everyday user of the internet and how to use it so that you can have more fun and less drama, as I say.
Yeah, I think I first became aware of you on Twitter. That's why I love Twitter. You get to meet people from around the world. And I noticed you've written a book.
Well, writing a book is probably a stretch. It started out as a handout, that book, which is now about 80 pages, that I used to give parents after my talks to give them an idea of what they could do when they went home and links to things. And that has grown into this manual monster, which is a combination of step-by-step instructions on how to set things up and articles that I've put all together about how things work. So it's got everything from online games to Facebook privacy settings, recommendations for apps, a whole bunch of stuff. Because what I was finding was that a lot of parents that were going home after the local police had come and talked to them, because that's generally the only other people that were doing the talks were a couple of other providers here in Australia and the local police. They went away with nowhere to go afterwards because we didn't have a lot of the resources that we have now. And I wanted to give them something to go home with. And so that's just grown and grown and grown.
You know, I'll be absolutely honest. It's amazing to see what the country of Australia has done in this field. I mean, your eSafety officer, the commissioner that you now have, I mean, to me, it's like a role model for every country in the world. Like, I've already sent messages to Canadian people in government here in Canada saying, why aren't we doing this in our country, right? Like, it makes total sense about how you guys have come together as a collective, it appears.
Yeah, it's incredibly valuable, particularly for the ability for children and their parents to be able to report things that are upsetting them online and knowing it's going to be followed up, because there was a great deal of frustration before that time that if you just reported it to the platform, you would never know whether it was followed up. Often you were sent a sort of generic message saying that it didn't comply with it didn't go against their community standards or whatever. So people stopped reporting it and kids were getting hurt. So that's really, really vital. And of course, they've expanded it much more to the educational sides of things as well.
For sure. And I can speak from firsthand experience that, boy, you guys follow up. There's no doubt about it, right? It's amazing how quickly the follow-up takes place. And again, a big tip of our white hat to what your country is doing. Now, what part of Australia are you from?
I'm in Sydney. So beautiful capital city, or it's not the capital city, capital of Australia is Canberra. Right. But Sydney is on the water. I imagine it's probably quite similar to some places in Canada.
So you're right on the ocean?
Yeah, right on the ocean. I literally live 20 minutes walk from the beach.
That's like us too. In Victoria, we're the farthest west you can go in Canada. So we are right on the Pacific Ocean. And for us, it's like a 5-minute drive to get down to the ocean, right?
Yeah, and a lot of our beaches are closed right now because there's too many people going to them thinking it's a holiday.
Yeah, go figure. Yeah, I don't know if you were following what was going on in Florida in the United States during spring break. And it's interesting, if you looked at some of the cell phone pinging technology that was out there, it was interesting to see how a lot of the kids, as they were leaving spring break, were going up into the major cities, both in the United States and Canada, and how those places have now had big breakouts of the COVID-19 as a result of that, right?
So yeah, we had that over here at Bondi Beach. There was a hot spot at Bondi Beach because it's a lot of backpackers and stuff that are staying there. So
And how is COVID right now in your country? Like, how are things? What are the stats and stuff going on there?
We're going incredibly well. Our two sides of government have been actually working together on this, which is just brilliant because they're usually not. And that makes a huge difference when you depoliticize the whole thing. So it means we have more than flattened the curve. We are in the downward part of the curve.
Good.
There are people getting sick. There are people dying from this. So it is still a very scary situation. But we're at the stage now where we're not quite under lockdown. We are encouraged to stay at home. We can go outside for exercise, for going to the doctor, to go to, going for groceries. Yep. And we don't want to let up because we know that there's a huge risk that it will really start to jump up again. So the question now is, where do we go from here?
Exactly. I think that's the big question that's being asked right across the world. I mean, here in British Columbia on the west coast of Canada, we're very similar to what's going on in Australia, very low. And, we flatten the curve. There's some talk that we're starting to come down from that curve now. Now the next question is, what is the next steps, right? And seeing what happens next, because if we let go too soon, the fear is that second wave, right? And having to go through all this again. So excellent. Right. So what I'm going to do is we're going to go into our question period. I've got a number of questions for you. We'll go from there. And the first question I have for you is, how do you think preteens and teens can use the internet and social media to stay socially connected while they physically distance to help flatten the curve? Great question. What are some of your thoughts on that?
Well, they're already doing it, aren't they?
Yeah.
So they're doing it in different ways. And if I use my sons as an example, who are not preteens, they're a little older than that. They've been using those platforms for quite a long time. So there wasn't that much of a difference. I think using these platforms to socialize with each other is something that preteens and teens have been doing for a long time. And in fact, they're teaching their families how to do this. So the important thing for this age group is for them to share the knowledge that they have with their families, whether they be extended community members or parents or grandparents, and how to do that safely. So what we do know is that on the whole, most teenagers and preteens are being educated about online safety at school, part of their curriculum. That's what I do when I go out and speak to kids. And one of the big messages I always give kids is pass this on. Don't keep it to yourself. Teach people around you how to do this. Teach your younger brothers and sisters. Be a community leader in this because you guys have got the knowledge. Whether they do some of these things or not, is up to them whether they behave responsibly with it. And that's the big key here. And that's what we know is a big problem at the moment. The eSafety Commissioner just came out recently and said there's been a huge spike in cyberbullying in our country because of the amount of kids that are online more often, and more often without adult supervision. And there's no way around it. These are kids. You can tell them until you're blue in the face about how to behave responsibly online. But with some kids, a minority of these kids will use this time where they're unsupervised and online to get up to mischief and unfortunately hurt other people.
Great comments. A couple of things. You're right. I'll be honest. Brandon was my Jedi Master. He was my Yoda. I was his digital Padawan, right? Like, I give total credit where credit's due. And, it was interesting when, out of necessity, a lot of us were turning to social media, the internet, to do work because we're working from home and schooling from home. It was interesting because it was like they were swan diving into the deep end of the pool. But parents were in the deep end with little water wings on, trying to figure out, how do I survive in this deep end of the pool? And there's a real opportunity here, in my opinion, where parents can now learn from the kids, which is really, I think, important for us to take. And I think, if anything, out of this, I think what this is doing is maybe giving parents a better appreciation of all the positives. Because one of my messages to parents has always been, the majority of our kids are doing super uber cool things online. They really are. And we older adults need to start acknowledging that fact. Yeah, there's a small percentage that aren't, that get themselves in the mischief. But we got to be careful that we're not painting that entire generation with the same brush, right? Thoughts?
Absolutely. They're all different. Kids are all different. I mean, sometimes I'll be talking to parents and a parent will say, you can't create boundaries around this stuff because that just forces kids to do the wrong thing and all kids will try and break rules. And I'm saying, what? That's absolutely not true. You can't paint kids with all the same brush. Sure, some kids will push back and they will breach boundaries, but a lot of kids won't, and they will eventually follow advice, even if it is after they've made an initial misstep or something like that. You have to treat every child differently. I've got 4 kids that I've raised, and every single one of them is completely different, and how they use the internet is completely different. And my oldest son, who's now 37 with a child of his own, started off on the internet in 1995, and the way he used the internet in those days and gaming and everything else, of course, is completely different to how other, my second generation of kids used it. So it's been a very interesting journey for me as a long-time digital parent. I've been doing this for well over 20 years, bringing up kids online, because I was an early adopter of it. And it was the other way around. I was the one who was actually bringing the technology into the home. I just fell in love with it in 1995 when I discovered online forums. But I still, all the way through that, learned so much from my kids because they use it differently, and they always will.
And the creativity of these kids is unbelievable. Let me share something with you. Here's a group of middle school kids here in British Columbia who are staying connected. Although we're distancing, they're staying connected by using social media to stay connected with their teachers and their other classmates. So I just want to share a short part of this video that they created, that they put on. It was all created by the students.
1, 2, 3, 4.
Amazing.
Amazing. How do they know that song? That's from my era.
I know. Middle school kids who produced, published all themselves, no teacher involvement whatsoever. And they decided to do this to stay connected. Like, the creativity of our kids is unbelievable when it comes to this.
But Darren, older people are getting really creative as well. My husband is 70 and he's been in a band for a long time. And as soon as they couldn't rehearse anymore, he's been doing the same thing. They haven't been doing it all together. They just put down tracks, sort of like a daisy chain of tracks.
Yeah.
And he worked it out. I'll tell you what, I could not get that man to even work out how to turn his iPhone on and off, but get him to work out how to do this for his band, and he's all over it. It's just a matter of desire, I think, with a lot of adults. You know, when they have to do something, they will find a way of learning this stuff.
And I you know, that'll dovetail and segue very nicely into a question I have at the end about, you know, out of this COVID-19, what are some of the things and positive things we're going to see? But out of necessity, I think a lot of adults who are very frightened of technology are now going, maybe it's not as bad as we thought it was.
Oh, I'm enjoying it, actually. I find that I tend to be a little bit of a stay-at-home person. I'm a sort of a bit of a typical geek where I just love all my, you know, my creature comforts at home.
Yeah.
And what I'm finding is that I'm communicating more with people more than ever because of the convenience.
Yeah.
You know, I can just sort of jump in front of the screen and do a Zoom meeting with my girlfriends. And I've been teaching them how to change their virtual backgrounds on Zoom and using all the settings and
Beth,
stuff.
my wife, is doing the same thing. She has this group of girls that she calls the Yaya sisters, right, from the movie.
Yeah.
And they're using blue jeans to do the same thing. But I think you're right. I think it's really, you know, it's showing us a different way to communicate. I don't think tech and digital will ever replace human face-to-face interaction, right? But I do think that it's definitely an adjunct, especially in times like this where we're distancing to stay connected with one another.
I think one of the things that I'm finding, though, and I had a conversation with my oldest son about this today, was learning to balance it all, because it's so easy to connect with people through these screens. Yeah. And he was saying basically, you have to give yourself some time off. So he's made a decision. He's not doing uni work over the weekend because it's just too easy to stretch things out during your uni day or your work day, and not perhaps cover so much ground, because you know you can do it on the weekend as well. Yeah. So he's developed some, you know, structure around what he does. And I think as a person I have worked from home for over 23 years, as the same age as my son, I discovered that very early, that you have to learn to switch off, because I was finding that I was spending the weekend catching up on work, and then that would take time away from family. So with all this connectivity, we also have to be considerate of everybody else's time, that you can't just, video chat with people on your schedule. You have to plan those things, and people need some downtime from all this connectivity as well.
And I'm hearing the same thing from teens that follow us, is that one of the things they're finding is that they're more connected than they ever were, which is now teaching them that, this thing called balance that my parents have been talking about and teachers have been talking about, it is something that we need to consider right now. So I absolutely agree with you 100% on that one. Next question for you. Now that most families are staying at home, more preteens and teens are spending more time online. What are your thoughts specific to screen time, which was already a hot topic by some special interest groups even before the COVID-19 hit us around the world? What are some of your thoughts on that?
The general thinking around screen time at the moment is that we have to relax what our expectations were, I think. The bottom line is that the screens are being used for social, for learning, for work, all that kind of stuff. But at the same time, we have to work harder at making sure that we're not just sitting down in front of screens all the time. An interesting thing I've noticed in my neighbourhood, which is quite delightful, is seeing families exercising together. So, you know, they've set up a sort of a mobile gym in their garage, and you go past and there's mum and the daughters doing some kind of a jazzercise or dance routine, or the dads are working out, and they're out on the streets working out a lot more, going bike riding or whatever it is. So I can see that that's happening, but I think in some families, particularly families where perhaps one of the parents or both parents are trying to keep a business going, that the screens could be a very attractive way of keeping the kids quiet while they're doing that. And there's a bit of a slippery slope that can happen with that. When the kids are all engaged on screens and quiet, it can seem like this is a great way to go. But in fact, we need messy behaviour in our families to be able for people to interact, for kids to grow and learn all this stuff as well. So it requires some discipline with all of this screen time.
Yeah, one of the things I've always said, it's not how much time they're spending online, it's what they're doing with that time that's really important. In
That's
other words,
important too,
if
yeah.
all they're doing is consuming social media, to me that's like bubble gum for the brain. Whereas if they're using social media to become producers, creators, and change makers, that's what stimulates the brain and creates critical thinking, right? Which is really important. Again, there still needs to be that balance, which I think is really important. But the other thing that I share with a lot of parents is a lot of people my age, parents, believe there's still a difference between the online world and the digital world. In today's world, it's just one world. It's what academia calls the on-life world, right? And sometimes I think parents kind of lose kind of focus on that issue. Having said that, the issue of balance and understanding what they're doing online is really important. And I do think that parents are kind of getting that now that they're there as a result of what's going on with COVID, that they're kind of maybe understanding that maybe what all these kids are doing online isn't just bubble gum for the brain.
Yeah, I'm not sure how widespread that thinking is. I still have a lot of parents who contact me who have a great deal of concern about their kids being online. I know that from my reading of all sorts of things on social media where parents are talking about this and on my page on Facebook, that a lot of parents who basically said no to any kind of online interaction for their children have changed their minds completely over this because they realise how isolated the kids are without it. Right. And they're struggling to come to terms with what they allow and what they don't allow. And for a lot of parents, banning everything was a great way of avoiding dealing with the issue. Yeah. While some parents just thought, for their own philosophical reasons that they didn't want their children to get into it. I know for a lot of parents it was like, I don't understand this stuff and it sounds scary to me, so take it all away, problem solved. Yeah. And, of course, that might work up to a certain age group. But even now, those age groups are getting younger and younger while they're doing it. So I think you're right. This online, offline type of thinking that a lot of people had where the online world wasn't real was what has given way to all sorts of problems that we've had, including cyberbullying, where what you say online doesn't really matter because it's online, it's not real, it's not face-to-face. And, of course, with technology developing, things are becoming more and more real online all the time.
Yeah, it's the screen
and there are
offers,
consequences for that.
Yeah, I mean, the screen offers, from a psychological standpoint, the disinhibition effect, right? And that's why it's people just think, well, I'm not face to face with this person, so what I'm saying online in a mean, rude way isn't a big deal because it's not real, when in fact it is. But the other thing I want to pick up on, you kind of mentioned a little bit, and I just want to catch on to that, is these parents who were giving their kids these devices as digital pacifiers, right? Rather than the powerful tools that they were. And usually when parents were giving these kids these digital pacifiers, I found a lot of time that is when the kids were doing more consuming than the producing and the creating. And again, understanding that I think is really important. And to kind of emphasize that, I don't know if you know Dr. Patrick Markey. He's the director of the International Research Laboratory at the University of Villanova. And he wrote a really good book called Moral Combat. I don't know if you've had the opportunity to read it, but he just tweeted out just recently, self-quarantining has made it clear that screens help prevent social isolation. They allow friends and coworkers and family to talk to each other. They have always done this. Contrary to fears of the past, screens are not destroying a generation, but today they're helping to save one. Whoa, interesting comment. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, well, that's very true. It's like, I'm sure you've had these conversations with your son as well, where you say, if this happened to us in the 70s, it would have been devastating. I had a boyfriend that lived 30 kilometres from me, hardly ever saw him, and he used to write me letters.
Yeah. What are those?
We could only talk for, 20 minutes on the phone before somebody wanted us to get off because somebody else had to make a call.
Or the party lines. Did you have those in Australia?
Oh, they were very dangerous, party lines. But, without wanting to sound like an old boomer saying, you kids don't know how lucky you are, you've got all this technology and you can connect with each other. The appreciation that we who grew up in an era where we didn't have this this connectivity through technology have for right now, and how amazing that's been for us as adults and also for the kids to be able to continue to connect with each other is absolutely extraordinary. And he's right. I can't imagine how my kids would have coped with this if we're in this situation where we didn't have the technology. Yeah. It is, and you're absolutely right. There's some amazing things on technology. And I think one of the things that parents have always found difficult is because they weren't using the technology for a lot of creativity. Not all parents do that. Some obviously do. And collaboration, that they didn't know what this technology was capable of. So in the classes or the presentations I give to parents, one of the things that I tell them was that when my kids were very young, the boys that I've got living at home, I started them off on a very, very tightly managed computer so that they could only really watch, kids programs, and they had kids picks, and then they had GarageBand because it was a Mac that they were on, a Mac Mini. And I gave them a rule, and the rule was that when they were allowed to be on this computer, which was a very short, limited time, they could spend half an hour fooling around playing games and doing stuff like that. But if they wanted an extra half an hour, they had to build something. They either had to write a story, make a movie, make music, or do something creative. That was the only way I'd allow them on for the extra half an hour. And that made a huge difference to their appreciation of the computers that they were using in their technology. So even though I was very limiting with how they could use that technology and gradually allowing more and more as they got more and more mature and were more responsible, I think the big benefit that I had, the bonus I had, was that I was already in that technology. I was already a tech head. And I think a lot of parents who don't come from that background really, really struggle. And the interesting thing that's going to happen now is that they've got to be more involved with their kids at home schooling, is they're going to see a lot of that. They're going to see a lot of that from school. They'll have a much greater appreciation of what their kids can actually do on this technology, using the platforms, and the awareness that they don't have to be just sitting there watching YouTube videos or playing online games. They can create online games. They can build all kinds of stuff.
But sometimes on those YouTube videos, they're learning how to do that stuff at the same time too.
Oh,
right?
Yes, absolutely. One of my sons completely learned everything he knew about physics from YouTube.
Yeah, amazing, right?
It was fantastic.
Next question I have for you. With a lot more preteens and teens being online right now, what do you think are some on-life safety and security challenges that both parents and teens need to be alive to online right now? So what do you think?
Well, I think the main thing that, and it's the one thing that we've always struggled with, is to set up a relationship with your child so that if they see something or they experience something, that they know where they can go to get help. So families are all different. There are some families where kids, and I was talking to Holly Ann Martin about this on my podcast last week, who works in education around child protection. Unfortunately, some children don't feel safe to go to a parent or an older trusted member of their family to report something that upsets them online.
Very common.
So it's really important. You can set up all the privacy settings, all the parental controls in the world to filter things out and to try and protect kids as much as possible. But the bottom line is things get through. Children find ways around all that technology to get to places that they shouldn't go. If your child can't find help either through an online platform like the eSafety Commissioner or the Kids Helpline that we have over here, or a counsellor or a mentor or a school teacher, or they won't seek that help because of fear, then that's one of the biggest problems that we have. So whilst I can recommend all kinds of privacy settings, as a real geek, I'm all over the privacy settings and the parental controls. I think when you drill it all down, it's the ability for the child to find help.
and finding somebody who they can trust, and knowing that whoever they reach out to will do something about it. Because one of the things I've heard from teens, we presented to just over 490,000 of them now in Canada and the United States. One of the big themes I hear from teens right now is that when they do go forward to report it to somebody, usually it goes on deaf ears, right? And like nothing's ever done about it, so they get frustrated. So next time something happens, they don't do anything about it. But you shared with me before you went on camera here that with the eSafety that's going on in your country right now, like action is taken pretty quickly.
Yeah, the eSafety Commissioner over here is a government-funded organisation, and it's been set up for a number of different reasons. Initially, it was set up for education and also for the ability for children. More or less, it was the children's online eSafety Commissioner initially, and then they've broadened that quite a bit now, so that they had agreements with the big social media companies that if something wasn't taken down within 48 hours, it needed to be taken down, whatever that might be, that a child could then contact the eSafety Commissioner and request that that was taken down. And their statistics are quite high. It's over, I think it's over 90% of requests are actioned when the eSafety Commissioner get involved. And the feedback is very good that and it's escalating. The more people that know about this amazing department and service, the more people are using it. So that's a really important part for children to know, that they do have that safety net. There is somewhere to go. The other part of it, of course, is the educational side of it, and helping children to understand, and teenagers to understand, that there are consequences for everything they do online, whether it's liking a comment that's offensive to sharing something that's harmful or offensive, because kids are kids. They do have a sense of being bulletproof, and that they can, in a sense, get away with stuff.
Yeah.
So that's an ongoing issue for whatever you're teaching kids, whether it's around, safety around all sorts of behaviour and practices, whether it's drugs and alcohol or sexual behaviour or online behaviour, trying to teach them that all of these things come with consequences, regardless of what, they think.
A big tip of my white hat, I mean, what the eSafety Commission in your country is doing, and others like yourself, is really a blueprint for the rest of the world, in my opinion. Like I've sent messages to my members of parliament going, we here in Canada should be doing exactly what they're doing in Australia right now. It's so impressive to see what is happening in your country, and in my opinion, how you're leading the world, and a lot of this, especially on the standardization of what is, because it appears now that if you're teaching in this field in Australia, correct me if I'm wrong, you need to be certified by the eSafety Commission to do that. Is that true?
Yeah, that's true. So you have to meet a whole lot of checks and balances. You have to be very, very particular on what you will be teaching and how you will be teaching that. And we basically signed a contract with best practices of how we will present that. Because there are a lot of people in this field who are deciding to, with the best will in the world, they want to be involved, but perhaps they're not completely on board with how you can do that. And what you don't want is, you don't want people going out there and making it worse by suggesting all kinds of things that don't fit with best practice. And that's still all being tightened up. So we'll be trained over each year. We have to also attend educational settings that have been set by the eSafety Commissioner, which is fantastic, because the eSafety Commissioner benefit from us as a group, the providers, because they're getting feedback from us from the front lines. We're physically going out and talking to kids, and often we're talking face-to-face with parents about this, or even, via messaging from parents. And what they are doing is, on the whole, mainly presenting their education online to schools, and it's a slightly different way of doing things. The whole benefit of having different presenters doing it in a different way is to get that variety, to get different impact. So whilst I come at it from quite a sort of very, very practical, technical aspect, you might get another presenter who does it from more of a theatrical aspect. Or you might get someone who focuses only on cyberbullying, or somebody who comes from a policing background who presents the sort of legal police side of things that is not something that I can speak about. And I think that's really important to have a lot of different people with different approaches to it, because what works for one group of people or one person may not work for another. And it's all about trying to create the same conversations but in different ways and have different impacts.
Yeah, it's a multifactorial approach, right? Which is what I'm hearing from you, which is really. Now, can somebody teach in schools without being certified by the eSafety Commissioner? Is that allowed, or do you have to be licensed to do that?
You can, yeah, there's no law against it. So if you wanted to teach in a school without being certified, you could. But on the whole, most schools look for that certification because it gives them an assurance that we've passed all the checks and balances and that we've done, our backgrounds are looked into, our safety is looked into. We all have working with kids registration, and they know that how we're presenting and what we're saying is based on best practices.
Yeah, it's the other thing I'm really impressed with. As a company, Brandon brings, based upon his academia, he brings evidence-based peer-reviewed research into what it is that we do as a company. I'm ex-law enforcement. We have IT people. We have privacy experts. We have IT experts. We come at this from a multifactorial approach. So it's kind of cool, and that's what I really like about what I'm seeing with the eSafety Commissioner's Office is that they're taking a multifactorial approach, but they're using best practices and evidence-based research in order to get their message out there.
Yeah, that's right. And the interesting thing about the research that I find, well, I suppose the most frustrating thing that I find about the research is how there's a lack of cohesion with it quite a lot of time. So you have the sort of the kids will be all right style research through to the, mobile phones are the worst thing to happen to the world and everybody's going to hell in a handbasket sort of thing research. And as a practitioner, I try and read the research as much as I can. I'm not an academic. Yeah. And what I'm seeing in my practice, just going out to so many schools and talking to so many kids, is sometimes not what I'm seeing in the research. So it's still very, very early days for research.
I agree.
And I think there needs to be more collaboration between academia and the sort of grassroots experience as well. Because people lie in research.
And that's why
they just do. They lie. I remember seeing this fabulous piece of research from McAfee, which is the antivirus company, that did some research where they asked parents, how involved are you in your children's online world, and how much supervision you have? And they came up with something like 75% of parents said that they were very involved. And then they asked their kids, how involved is mum and dad in your online world? How aware are they about what you're getting up to online? And it was 45%. Yeah. It was something like that. It was a huge disparity, because what parent is ever going to admit to the fact that they're not supervising their kids online? And some kids think they're getting away with a lot more than they actually are. So, I mean, it all depends on the research.
As Brandon says, welcome to academia, right? That's why I love Justin. Okay. That's why I love Justin and Samir with the Cyberbullying Institute, right, in Florida, because they kind of bring academia to also practitioners. We converse quite a bit with what it is that we do, because we're much like you. I'm very much a practitioner. Brandon's the academia, but also a practitioner. And what I find is that at the grassroots level, where we are talking to the kids, a lot of research is about 1 to 1.5, maybe 2 years old, because it takes time to do the research and then publish that research. And in today's world, things are changing almost every 6 months, that sometimes the research they're putting out is dated and sometimes not necessarily reflective of what's going on in the here and now. Not all the time, but as Brandon said, welcome to academia, right? Yeah. And he's so true.
Yep. I know.
Next question I have for you is, with the increased amount of disinformation and misinformation, including phishing attacks concerning COVID-19 online, what are some of the trusted resources that you recommend for teens and their parents to turn to?
You know what? With the classes, or I wouldn't call them classes, they're more like workshops with students, is I ask them what they are using. So when I go out and talk to students, my talks Over the last, I've been doing this for 10 years now, they've changed quite a lot. They started out as a more of a sort of lecture, I guess, on my part at the beginning. And now what they are is very much, I let the kids run things. Like I give them the sort of format of where we're going with our education on cyber safety, but I'm trying to get them to give me the answers. And the reason for that is because a lot of them already know the answers to this. I'm really interested to find out what they are using. They're already got an idea about this sort of information overload that they have and recognising valid sources of information over fake news or whatever it is. So what I hear from kids that they're already doing is basically they're Googling things and they have trusted sources. So it might be a trusted source on YouTube, for instance. They might follow a particular channel on YouTube and they have built trust with that person. So if that person says something, then they trust that person. Mm-hmm. It might be that they recognise certain news organisations, CNN, it might be the ABC over here. And if you haven't seen it reported on any of those news organisations, then it probably isn't true. Mm-hmm. Some younger kids really struggle with that because they're not at that level. So you end up with all sorts of crazy hoaxes and things that go around that might set off alarm bells. So in my recommendations, one of the things that I recommend is Snopes, because I think that's easy for kids to navigate. Great website. Yeah. So if you hear something or see something online and you're not quite sure, search there. If there's nothing about it on Snopes, it probably hasn't reached a stage where Snopes have had to do a report on it, or they might be in the process of doing it. Google it, have a look at who's reporting on it. Don't just accept what you see online. But I generally find that kids already have a huge understanding of that. They more so than adults. It's usually people my age that are spreading all the lies and fake news on Facebook. I find that more than kids do. But with younger kids, what we talk about in the workshops, and they generally say this, check with mum or dad, see if dad's heard about, mum or dad have heard about it. Some of them will do that and talk to each other and check things out first through all those normal channels. But, in this particular era that we're in, all kinds of cybercrime and cyberbullying and everything is ramping up before we even know it, because everybody's online. So it's perfect for all, those types of people to get to basically score whatever it is that they're after.
And you're so right. Like, I help more parents that do things online than their kids do. And in fact, a lot of times when I talk to the kids are going, yeah, my parent did it again. I mean, Brandon does that to me all the time. Yeah, boomer, right? That's where the term boomer came from, right? Where they call us these boomers and stuff. It is so true, right? Like, and kids are starting to get the understanding, looking for multiple sources. Don't just depend upon one thing they're reading. Look for those multiple trusted sources online to help confirm what it is that they're reading, hearing, or seeing online, right? Which I think
they're recognizing all the fake memes and videos much faster than adults are. They've already been passed around the internet, multiple times before an adult sees it and they go, oh, that's a fake. Yeah, and I'm so cynical about that stuff. Somebody shared something with me today that has all these amazing trees in it that look like people, and my immediate thought is, that's a fake. I don't trust anything anymore, which is a shame.
It's interesting to see how you take very much a Greek Aristotelical approach to how you interact with kids, where you pose the question to start the conversation and have the kids actually guide the discussion from there, right? So you're not so much a lecture developmental format. You're more of the Greek ask the question, let's start thinking critically and talking critically.
Yeah, well, that just sort of happened gradually, because I'm come from a performing background. I don't come from a teaching background.
Right.
I've done various classes in presenting and teaching and stuff like that, but I went to drum school. I come from a performing background, and
Did you say drum school?
Drama
Oh,
school, not
drama.
drum
It's the
school.
accent. I thought you said drama school. I thought, wow, you're a
No,
drummer. Right.
no,
Okay. Drama school. Gotcha.
I come from a performing background. And but when I started to actually ask kids to come up with answers, I was just so delighted with what they said. And the other thing that happened, and teachers know this is not not news to teachers, is the other kids pay far more attention to what their peers are saying than, some crusty old lady that comes in who thinks they know something about technology. So, and it means that it sticks. And also, you as an adult just learn so much that you can then inform yourself with. Because, as you said earlier, things change so rapidly.
Yeah.
Whatever's in one week may be out the next week. They can happen that quickly that all of a sudden you go into a school and mention an app and they're all sniggering at you like, oh, that's for babies.
Yeah.
And at another school, it might be something that they're all into. So getting them to talk about their experiences is really, really important, because we can't actually, as adults, hope to guide them or educate them without really knowing what it is that they're dealing with. And I think they're teaching each other.
And having them play a role in that. I mean, a really good example is, we have thousands of teens that follow us in social media. We have a teen advisory committee that we turn to twice a year, where we connect with them and they bring us up to speed on what's going on. And we ask them, well, if you were going to do this, how would you do this and why, right? So we're learning from them to help build what it is we're doing. Because I do find that sometimes people in our industry believe that because I'm the adult and the expert, I know what's best. Maybe not. Maybe
you're going to take a big fall with that. You can never assume you know what's best.
Yeah.
It's just a case for me of the bottom line for me is I love technology. I am a total tech head with my technology and have been ever since I first got my first Cassiopeia. It was a Cassiopeia, it was before computer. It wasn't before computers, but it was just this little screen thing. I've just always loved it. And the thing for me was getting frustrated seeing people not getting hurt online, and particularly kids. I absolutely adore kids. I love teaching kids. And I know that in many cases they don't have an adult who's capable of helping them and guiding them. Or the best thing that we can do is arm kids to give them the ability to find help, to get themselves out of trouble, because we don't know if there's somebody around them who's capable of doing that. So they still need adult supervision. They still need love. They still need care. So I go in very, very honestly to a school. I don't pretend to be some cool young thing that's got it all going on or whatever. Yep, I am the lame mummy gamer. That's me. That's what I call myself, the lame mummy gamer. I am who I am. I love the internet, and I don't pretend to be anything different, and I don't pretend to do things the same way as kids do. I'm just basically an older person who can help guide them in the direction so they can understand and find their own answers to a lot of this, and they know it all. It's just about them hearing it en masse. And so hopefully when I leave that classroom, they know how to discuss it amongst each other. They know that they can go to each other for help. They know where to go somewhere else for help, whether it's online or within the room or at school or at home. So they have a better understanding of some of those little barriers and gateways that they need to put up to make themselves safer. So if they didn't know something about a piece of technology, did you know that you could put this little safety setting up here and that would help protect you? If you don't want to block someone, you can mute them, all that kind of just little bits of technical stuff that we can help them with.
Speaking of old technology, here's my first Samsung flip phone. We've kept all our old technology to show how things are growing. But just for your, one of the kids say to me, you know what, Darren, you're a boomer, but you're a dripping boomer. You're a dripping boomer.
You see,
See, that's what you are now. You are now christened as a dripping Australian boomer.
Oh, there you go.
That's what the kids say.
That'll be my tag name. That'll be my tag.
Next question I have for you. Now that schools are closed to help stop the spread of COVID-19, many are turning to online education to keep their students involved as best they can. One of the concerns that I have surrounding a quick pivot to online remote teaching are issues surrounding privacy especially as it relates to GDPR, which I know it doesn't fall in Australia or Canada, but privacy regulations do. Do you think some of the school districts, out of necessity, are putting these real concerns on the back burner just to expedite online learning? And if yes, what will the consequences be? Kind of a deep question, but I think it's an important one in today's world, because we've made this quick pivot. And as a result of that, are educators giving up convenience for privacy?
I think they're discovering that as they go along. It's happened so fast that all of a sudden they had to interact with their students online, and what they're finding is that there are traps in that. So it might be, for instance, that if they all have video on, that children are giving away information about themselves by what's happening in the background. There might be embarrassing things that happen in the background behind them, because they hadn't had the foresight to think that up. So then what happened was a lot of schools said, right, no video because this is too risky. We're giving away too much information. So now they're only having students that are chatting or using voice. And that's difficult as a teacher because you're not seeing how the children are reacting. And I find that very difficult myself. I've held a couple of webinars for parents just recently that I've self-hosted, which is really the first time I've ever done it, because any other webinar I've done, I've always been a guest host. It's been held by an organisation or a school.
Right.
And the interesting thing for me in that is how difficult it is to give a presentation without seeing your audience, because as a performer, even when I was performing on stage, you have a sense of the audience and whether they're coming with you and how they're responding to you on stage, even if you've got, lights all in your eyes and you can only see the first couple of rows. But in a webinar, you're not getting that feedback, and it's really, really difficult. So from a teacher's perspective, without being able to see the class, to see whether somebody raises their eyebrows because they're not quite sure that they don't get it, it really must lose a lot in their ability to be able to teach some things and to get that feedback visually. So I'm finding in my conversations with teachers, there's quite a few teachers that I talk to through my page and that I've talked to privately, is understanding what platforms they can use effectively and safe platforms. So over here in Australia, what I'm hearing is that schools are using Google Classroom, Microsoft Teams, some schools are using Zoom, WebEx is another one by Cisco, which I haven't personally used. They're keeping their classes very short for the online learning, because they're finding it a struggle for some students, particularly the younger ones, to maintain concentration through all of that. And the privacy issue is a big problem, because ideally with the younger kids, you'd have a parent around to make sure that they're concentrating and that it's safe for them online. But a lot of parents aren't doing that. They're struggling to run businesses from home, as well as having distance learning with their kids and supervising their kids online. So there's some real opportunities, I think, there for educational platforms to make it easier for students to be able to do distance learning. So if you're using Microsoft Teams, for instance, of course that works much better on Microsoft platforms, but not all kids have access to that. Now, you can run them on a Mac and use all sorts of Microsoft for Mac software and all that kind of stuff, but then that becomes limiting. A lot of kids, all they had at home, if they were having a bring your own device, was an iPad. A lot of schools have iPads. So I'm very concerned about the fact that we need to make it easy. We need to make it cross-platform, and that's why Zoom has taken off, because it is so easy for people to get onto a Zoom. They can just ring in from a phone number, click on a link from a mobile phone, from a tablet, from any kind of computer, and it just works. And the other thing with Zoom is it's very good at balancing out things like bad sound and video and all that kind of stuff. And it's simple. So there's some very good opportunities for a lot of these software companies to come up with better ways of doing this that also respect the privacy and the security of people using them.
Am I correct that has school just started again in Australia? Like, were you on break?
It's all different. So what happened with a lot of schools was that a lot of states decided, some states decided to go to break early. So we have a 2-week Easter break.
Right.
In order for them to be able to set up the systems to be able to get their kids online. And then other schools went right through to the normal time of break. So in New South Wales, where I am, we've still got another week's holiday, whereas Victorian schools have gone back again this week, and they all have different systems. The Prime Minister has basically announced he wants all schools open. So what that means is that people, frontline workers particularly, can send their kids to school, or any other parent that wants to send their child to a school. But what we found last term was that a lot of parents were keeping kids home because they were concerned about transmission happening in schools. I think it's going to be really interesting to see what happens this upcoming term, because I think the rubber has really hit the road, and a lot of parents are now finding out how difficult it is to work from home, which is what a lot of parents have to do, and supervise homeschool learning. And we're in a downward curve with transmission and with not so much with death rates. That's continuing to go up, but very slowly. And it might be a case of, oh my God, I can't handle this. They have got to go back to school. So I'm wondering if there's going to be a lot more kids going back in this term.
Yeah.
So that's hard for teachers, because they've got to do two things. They've got to teach face-to-face, and they've got to teach virtually.
I don't know if you had an opportunity, but we wrote an article where we interviewed a bunch of kids in North America who've been online learning for the past 2 weeks.
I did see that. That was fabulous.
We asked them what's working and what's not working. And I can tell you, it's picked up a lot of traction with teachers right now across North America, because it's offering them insight from the kids saying, you know, what's working. One of their biggest frustrations was that teachers are using different platforms, which is really frustrating to them at one school. They would hope a school would just go with one platform rather than multiple platforms, is one of the things that was reported. You know, they're really giving teachers what they call student passes now, where teachers are so afraid that they're going to make a mistake. And the kids are going, don't worry about it. Like, we're all learning this together. We know you're going to make mistakes, so don't worry about it. The other thing that was interesting is they said a lot of teachers in schools and school districts are trying to push too much information online, which is it's causing high anxiety in the kids and stuff. And so their feedback was, we thought, extremely important to hear what their experience is. Because again, I think sometimes we adults believe that we know best, when in fact, we have a part to play, but listening to the kids, their experiences, I think is also really important as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I'm hearing that from my own sons with doing at uni, that they're all using different platforms. One of my sons both of them use Discord quite a lot. Yeah. They use it just to chat with all their mates, to share things. And they use that more as a collaboration sort of tool and platform more than anything else. And then when they were asked to use Teams, Microsoft Teams, it seemed really clunky. Yeah. And they're like, why don't the lecturers just use Discord? It's so much easier. Yeah. They're able to mute people that are annoying, you know, where they couldn't do that on Teams. There's a bunch of all sorts of little things that I think a lot of the software developers haven't kept in mind, because you're dealing with a lot of people, mainly with kids. They're quite used to, a lot of them are quite used to the technology. Yep. They know how to mute someone that's annoying. Yep. They know a lot of the kids, funnily enough, that I've heard, can't stand the video chats, because that's not what they do. Kids like to text each other, to chat without seeing each other. And you can understand that, particularly from teenagers who are most self-conscious.
I hear that from my son all the time.
Most self-conscious when you're a teenager. And one of my sons is, why do they have to see my face?
Brandon says the same thing. Whenever I time to FaceTime, he goes, no, I don't want to just text me, right? And stuff,
I know. Right? Nobody wants to see your face. But, so this whole thing of teachers wanting to see people's faces is for the teacher's benefit, obviously, so they can get that feedback and make sure that the kids are paying attention. But from the kids, when they're using technology, that's not how they normally roll. So for younger kids, I find in primary school who've just discovered FaceTime and all that kind of stuff, because over here we have a high percentage of Apple users with primary school kids, which is sort of under the age of 12, they might use FaceTime, and particularly girls like using it. But a lot of the guys don't, because they might be having a bad hair day. They might have a pimple, you know, they can't be bothered getting up out of bed or whatever it is. So they use text chat. And for most of these platforms, they're asking for these students to use video chat, and it's not what they want.
What's interesting, though, Leonie, is that some of the feedback we got from a lot of the kids was that those platforms that are being used where they're not using video, they don't like them because right now they want to have that face-to-face contact with their peers because they're not seeing them at all because of the lockdown that is going on. So it's interesting, right? Sometimes it could be situational or context specific as well. The other thing that I find frustrating is, we're giving these teachers all these ideas. Here's Zoom, here's Blue Jeans, here's Microsoft Teams, but we're not providing the educators with the training on how to use those platforms as well.
They don't have time.
Yeah.
Darren, I feel so sorry for everyone in this situation. I'm not a teacher, but I do hear from teachers quite a lot. And I feel really sorry for the fact that they've been thrown into this, and they're going to be responsible for these kids in their education, and they've got parents yelling at them saying it's too much, turn it off, I can't manage this, my kid's just going to read each day and that's it, I'm not doing any of the work. And the teachers are being asked to provide a normal curriculum in many cases because they're worried that by the end of the year the kids are going to have to do this enormous catch up to be able to be, to catch up with the work that they need to do. So in amongst all of that and teachers having to prepare completely different style of teaching, they're also being asked to use a whole new platform that they may not have ever used before. Some teachers will be quite savvy at that kind of stuff, and there are a lot of teachers out there. I go into schools, I know what they're like, and they'll openly just say to me, I am a complete tech dinosaur. I have no idea with technology. So it's going to take some time to get people up to date with this, and I think sometimes we can provide people with platforms that are overly complex that don't need to be.
And what's also interesting is I've heard from teachers, especially from independent schools where parents pay for their child's education, that they're under far more pressure to put this stuff out there to their kids because the parents are paying for their education rather than those who are in the public system, which is, again, very interesting, right?
Yeah, it's a real dilemma, and I think there are really important points on all sides of this. But I think what we need to do, and it's what we have always needed to do, is make these platforms more user-friendly. Yeah. Right from the beginning of me teaching this stuff, one of the biggest issues I had was with Facebook, with people jumping onto Facebook and not understanding how to set up their privacy settings. And they should never have had to do that, Darren. It should have been set up for privacy first and then switch things off. And it should have been very, very clear that if you want a public platform, you set up a Facebook page. It used to take me ages to explain to people the difference between a profile and a page. And I don't generally need to do that anymore, but this is one of the things that Julian Grant talks about, the eSafety Commission, which is privacy by design. And it's so important that tech companies get responsible and make things simple for consumers. And I am totally on the side of the consumer. I am not one of those tech geeks that says, oh, these stupid consumers, why don't they just set up two-factor authentication and that would solve the problem? No, it's the platforms are the problem here. They're the villain here. They aren't making it so that it is already set up, so that you must set it up before you use it. And it's within every aspect of technology, we have to make it so the consumers cannot make mistakes, so that it is easy for them to use.
I do think that COVID-19 is going to be a watershed moment for a lot of these social media vendors. I really do, as a result of a lot of the things that you were just saying, especially like Julia says with the Privacy Commission, that it's privacy by design. That's where it should start at, right? Which is, I think, really important as well.
And the only way that can happen is through regulation, Darren. I do not trust any of these companies, except for perhaps Apple, to do the right thing until they're absolutely forced to do it. And it's a shame, but they have their reasons for doing that. You know, they say it stops innovation and development, and I think they're sacrificing consumers by doing that. I mean, look at the car industry over here. When we go and buy a new car, we're not told, oh, it's only safe, if you get under the bonnet and you twink with this and you tune this up and you I know nothing about mechanics, you can tell, right?
Did you say
But,
bonnet underneath the bonnet? What does that mean? When I think bonnet, I think hat here in Canada,
okay.
right?
Oh,
What does
I don't
that
know
mean?
what you call it. It's the thing at the front, where the engine's in.
Oh,
Anyway,
the hood.
the hood. We don't call it a hood over
You
here.
call it a bonnet.
What is where gangs hang out, isn't it? In dark alleys.
Yeah, we're both from Commonwealth countries, but isn't it interesting how English can differ from country to country?
Yeah, but I mean, we have consumer rights over here. We
Yeah.
have standards over here for things that people buy, whether it's a washing machine, a fridge, or a car. And you can't sell one of those things without it being absolutely safe. So you plug it into the wall, you turn it on, and that's all you have to do.
Yeah.
And the history of the internet was all about growth and development and innovation, and the sacrificial lamb has been the consumer over that, and it's just wrong. And as far as online learning platforms go, I can see Apple leading the way on this, and I'm waiting for the time they come up with cross-platform messaging and FaceTime, because I think people will flock to it because it's easy, simple to use. We know that they've done their best for privacy. I know Apple muck up every now and then, and something will go wrong, but generally, people want to trust that there isn't going to be some hacker Zoom bombing them, or
I also think that one of the ways to make the changes that you're talking about is we as the consumer have to have the ability to sue these people. We got to get rid of that safe harbor that they have in legislation, especially here in North America, where you can't sue them for doing what it is they're doing. Because like it or
they're
not,
already doing that, aren't they? In Europe, there've been some class action.
Absolutely.
Against,
because like it or not, money talks, right? And with these individuals, unless there's consequences to actions, significant consequences to actions, then there's no impetus for them to change their behavior and how they're designing things, right?
Well, what they're doing is criminal. It's how long did it take YouTube to come up with YouTube Kids and actually do it properly?
Yeah.
They launched YouTube Kids with pornography on it.
Yeah.
I mean, it's just ridiculous.
I agree.
So, and they're harming kids by doing that. So these big companies have got a lot of responsibility for this, and I certainly don't blame the consumer, parents or students or anything. It means we have to have our wits about us, and that's what you and I do, Darren, as we go into schools and talk to parents, and we're trying to fill in the gaps for all of that.
Next question. I've been talking about the unequal access to the internet, and especially with families who face socioeconomic barriers or inequalities for several years now. And I believe this pandemic is shining even a brighter light on this challenge. How is your country dealing with this challenge, especially when it comes to schools who are using online education during this pandemic, knowing that there will be students who will not be able to access this technology?
I think it's a really big problem, Darren, because in our country, it's state by state. So each state has its own education department, and they all do things slightly differently. So what I'm hearing from some schools is they're loaning devices out. And that's all well and good if the kids got access to a decent amount of internet. So you've got a lot of families out there where they actually don't have access to internet, as my household does, for instance. So what they're using is they're using dad's phone to hotspot, and dad might only have a certain amount of data allowed. So what do you do for that child that doesn't even, they're given an iPad or a computer to take home, and they don't have the ability to even connect online properly? In some places, the internet is so bad that if they were to connect online for any kind of an interactive chat or a Zoom or whatever it might be that they're doing, that it's so bad that they keep dropping out all the time, or they don't have a clear picture on the screen of what they're doing. In some areas out in what we call the bush, in Aboriginal communities, they have even less of that. So one of the things that is really fabulous is we have a public broadcaster over here called the ABC, and they've always had an educational channel over here, a TV channel, and they are ramping that up. So pretty soon, I can't remember the exact date in April, they are going to be putting a lot more educational programs on there, which is just fantastic, because we find that even in outlying areas, most families have a TV, or a lot of families do, so that kids that don't have access to internet, don't have access to a device, can at least have educational programs. But it's really showing up the inequities and the haves and the have-nots in this situation, Darren, in a big way. And it's all piecemeal. It seems like there isn't one person saying, okay, I haven't seen this anyway in Australia. This is a great opportunity to fix this. Now, quite a few years ago, in about 2007 or 2008, we had a Prime Minister called Mr. Kevin Rudd, and he developed a one child, I think it was called One Child, One Laptop principle. So after year 9, so that's when kids are around about 15 years of age, every child in Australia was given a laptop, and it was a wonderful IBM laptop at the time, which is now Lenovo, but it looked exactly the same with a little red button in the middle. It was a workhorse. You could drop it from the top of a building and it probably wouldn't smash. And it was all locked up. So you could do very, very little on it. So it was like taking home a security locked up laptop that you might get from work.
Very sandboxed.
Yeah, very sandboxed. You had to have admin privileges to add anything to it. So you couldn't game on it. You wouldn't want to anyway. It was so low powered. My son got one of those in year 9, and it was one of the best systems that Australia ever did, because it meant that all kids at public school got access to that. Private schools had their own different ways of doing it. I think some of the private schools even got hold of it as well. It was a fantastic idea, and it equalised things and also gave a lot of confidence to parents, knowing that the device that the child was bringing home was protected enough so that, without a lot of fiddling around, it was very difficult for kids to bring bad stuff back into schools as well. So we might actually have to go back to that at some point, where the government pays for all kids who don't have that access to be able to have that access.
But the problem now is although they get the machine, how do they connect with it if they don't have broadband or the ability to connect to the internet? I mean, a really good example in one of our provinces, the school, and I shared this with Wayne in Ireland and Alan in England, and they're going to approach their prospective school districts. But there's one school district in Alberta, all their school buses have Wi-Fi built right into the school buses. So when the kids are traveling to and from school, they can still do their homework, because some of them are on the buses for maybe an hour. So what they're doing is they're creating a mesh network because the school buses aren't being used right now. So what they're doing is they're creating a mesh network using school buses into the communities so that the kids can now connect to the internet via the Wi-Fi that are on the school buses. What a great
Which is kind of unfair in a way, to make a child do homework on a school bus. Have you ever been on a school bus in the afternoon on the way home?
No, I haven't. But you know what? A lot of the kids are doing it, and maybe they're not necessarily doing homework. Maybe they're doing other things on there as well. But it's kind of cool, though, how the school districts, out of necessity, are now using these school buses like a mesh network to allow accessibility to the kids that are in these neighborhoods that don't necessarily have, they may have the technology to connect, but they didn't have an ability to connect to the internet, right? Which is kind of cool.
Yeah. So I think in order to have equity, you also need, for every home that has the ability to connect to the internet, to have a certain level, a base level. Because otherwise, in this particular, we don't know how long this is going to go on for. It could be 18 months that we're doing distance learning, in which case every child needs the ability to be able to connect to the internet. So that means the telcos that we have over here, allowing everybody to have more access. And what we're finding over here is some of the telcos are doing that. So the other day I got an email from Telstra telling me that I had an extra amount of gigabytes on my phone available for no extra cost. So some of the telcos are stepping up to doing that. But we do need to, we do need to make sure that there's equity amongst that. A lot of schools are actually mailing out work to kids.
Well, here in Canada, you're required in this province that if you're unable to supply the training online, you have to be able to provide that student with another ability to do that, maybe paper, right, and stuff. So, I mean, they're looking at, but I think, again, I think you're right. I think this has shone a light that maybe having broadband available everywhere in the country to everybody and making it that it's free may be a way to go as well, right? Because for these lower socioeconomic families that don't have a lot of money, they can't pay for internet access, right? So it again, which kind of dovetails very nicely into the next question I'm going to ask you, which is, I do believe out of the ashes of COVID-19 pandemic will come a fiery phoenix of social media ingenuity. What are some of the things you are now seeing taking place online that were not present prior to the COVID-19 pandemic that you think will stay with us once this watershed moment has passed? And will this change the way we educate or even do business? Kind of another deep question for you. What do you think?
Well, from my perspective and my ability to be able to educate, I think there'll be a greater amount of embracing of doing things virtually, because I've always had distance learning available for schools and for parents, but it's never really been embraced. I actually did do a Skype distance, I suppose you call it distance learning, with some, what do you call them over there? Girl guides.
Yeah, Girl Guides. Yeah. What
Girl
do you call them
guides
in
in
Australia?
Virginia. We're all scouts now. We don't have girl guides and boy guides. We just have scouts. But yeah, in Virginia, I did one years and years ago over Skype, and it was so much fun. And I think that will be more embraced, and that's really good, because my ability to go out to outlying areas is really quite difficult unless the community can do some fundraising to fly me out there. So Australia's a big, big place, to get from here to Perth is 5 hours in a plane. It takes a long time to get around this country. And it would be really great to be able to do more of that virtually, to get out to those schools, to save them money and make it possible for them to be able to have different ways of learning about cyber safety, because right now they are getting a certain amount of cyber safety in their curriculum. They are able to download the educational products from the eSafety Commissioner and also access their webinars. But in a lot of cases, schools call me out, as they probably do with you, Darren, as well, just to give things a little bit more emphasis. So the kids are kind of learning, they're hearing all the same things, and what they want is they want somebody with a bit of personality to go out there and look at it from a different aspect, somebody who's working in the field, who the kids might relate to in some way, so that it underpins everything that they're doing.
Yeah.
And
it's like the booster shot, as you called it, right? Like we come in and it's
yeah.
like a booster shot. And to be quite honest, I find that a lot of schools that are teaching, their lesson plans are so dated that they have no relevancy to where the kids are today. So a lot of the kids like it when we come in because we're very relevant to what's going on, because we stay so current. I don't know if you're finding the same thing.
Yes, I think I'd love to be a fly on the wall sometimes. I go into schools and teachers say, "Oh, wow, the kids have really enjoyed that."
Yeah.
And I almost like they were really surprised.
Yeah.
And I'm like, yeah, what have they been doing? Who's been talking to them previously? I went out to a school once and they had, unfortunately, had a police youth liaison officer out there, a young fellow, who went out and did a talk just before me to a kindergarten class. It was a very young class, and he was supposed to talk to them for 45 minutes. He only had 10 minutes of material, and then after that opened it up to questions. The class went completely berserk with the kids all running around screaming, and all they wanted to know about was his taser and his gun.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
yeah, no, I hear you.
Yeah, so I mean, it's just really, I think what I'm seeing online is more acceptance of online learning, which is so important for people that don't normally get the same ability or quality of education that they might get if they were in the cities, for instance. And I think it's wonderful for families that can't be together under circumstances, they can't travel. And we know that it's quite likely that we're not going to have any worldwide travelling from this country for perhaps a year. So all of that is, I think, fantastic for keeping people together, for educating people and connecting people.
We're lucky. I mean, Brandon had the foresight 2 years ago to go, hey, Dad, because much like Australia, Canada is a very big country. And a lot of our communities, especially in Northern Canada, are very isolated. So, having the White Hatters virtual studio like we have allows us to beam in, to bring us in that is cost effective, to bring in somebody else to talk about this stuff. So I do think that, yeah, to a degree, this type of technology specific to what it is that we do can have some advantages for sure for schools that are at a distance. And, I do find sometimes that inner schools, big city schools, a lot of times they're able to bring in presenters face to face like us and like you, but to the expense of those who are more isolated, who just don't have the funding to do that, but their kids need this information just as much as the inner city schools do. So I do agree with you that I think, virtual type of training and technology is going to be a game changer. Last question I have for you is, what are you doing as a social media safety and digital literacy advocate or company to stay involved in getting your important message out to others? I mean, like our company, we were primarily school-based, right? We're into a lot of schools, 490,000 students that we've now presented to across Canada and the US. And it basically is dried up, right? Because we're not going into schools because of what's going on with COVID. So as a company, we're looking to do things like more virtual stuff. But what are you doing? Or are you, where are you going? What are you doing? What are some of your thoughts that you can maybe share with others in our field?
Well, I'm using the internet a lot to get out to people. So at the moment, we're in a sort of a transition phase where we're trying to work out the best method and the best way to get back into schools that's safe for everybody and accessible. And a lot of that will come down to the schools themselves and how much they've adapted to it. So it's really important that if I'm presenting in a school that I'm using whatever platform that they're used to using to make it as easy as possible and to make it as safe as possible to do that. So I'm changing some different ways that I'm going to be doing that. I started up a podcast a month ago, which is really fun. It's something I've wanted to do for a long time. I have a community radio background. 15 years ago, maybe 20 years ago, I was in community radio. Then I took up podcasting before anyone ever really knew what that was in 2006.
Yeah.
And I haven't had much to do with it for over 10 years. And it was something I always enjoyed doing, is talking to other people. My motto always was that everybody has a story. And I love that about people and talking to people about their story. And I thought this is a really good opportunity to connect with people in my field and sort of slightly outside of my field and have conversations with them, whether it's a school teacher, another eSafety presenter, the police, students, parents, all kinds of people that have a stake in all of this online cyber safety area that I'm in. Now that we're all online, every one of us are online, the stakes are a lot higher as to, making sure that everybody is educated on this stuff. And I'm really enjoying that. And it's slow, as podcasts are. Everybody's doing a podcast. Everybody who's anyone is doing a podcast, as you're doing.
Yeah.
So for me, it's a bit of fun. It's a bit of release and going back to some of my roots there. I'm very engaged with my community on Facebook. So I have a Facebook page, and that's very engaging at the moment with so many parents and teachers having questions about all of this stuff.
What's your Facebook page?
Just look for the Cyber Safety Lady on Facebook and you'll find it. I have to update a whole bunch of stuff. I spent quite a few weeks just researching video chat apps, because while I understand how they work, I hadn't used a lot of them personally or really had a look at how they're being used now. So that was something that took me quite a while, is to really go in and talk to different people, how they're using them, all the different platforms and what the safety issues were around them, particularly Zoom, which has just gone off like a rocket. I've been doing online webinars for parents. My next one is going to be with parents and students together, and it'll be age-based. So I'm thinking maybe year 5 and 6 over here, which is sort of around 10 and 11 years old, and the parents will be there with their kids doing it. So it's still about...
And are you charging for those, or are you doing those as free?
The webinars, I'm charging $10, 10 Australian dollars. It's more of a donation, and throwing in a free book, which is normally worth $15. So The parent comes out $5 ahead in advance.
Yeah.
I just figured didn't want to put too much of a barrier up there.
I agree.
And for me, it was also a bit of a test case to see how effective it would be and how it was taken up, whether people were open to doing that. Because I know you've had some issues in your work with this also, Darren. One of the biggest stumbling blocks that we have as educators on this subject is actually getting adults and parents involved and educated, because it is, for a lot of parents, very confronting. It's the last thing that they want to do if they've got a free night, is to spend time listening about scary stuff on the internet. They'd rather just keep going the way they're going and hope for the best. And human beings are creatures that believe that nothing really bad's going to happen to them. It's always someone else. So
I heard that clearly from Wayne in Ireland, Alan in Great Britain, me in Canada. Parental abdication is an issue. Like, I was at a school where I was presented to over 1,300 high school students. That night we did a parents presentation. We had 3 parents show up. Like, parental abdication is a significant issue. And I've always been trying to figure out what's the special sauce, because the research out there shows us that parents who are engaged with their kids online, those kids are far less likely to get involved in less than desirable behavior. But parental abdication is significant for sure.
Yeah. And it's not just in our industry, it's also in other presenters that present on drug and alcohol or sexual health or something are finding the same thing. I've got a friend of mine who presents on child protection. She finds exactly the same thing. It's parents will show up for concerts and for sporting events, and they will make time for things that are soft subjects. It might be something on wellness or something like that. But when it comes to a confronting subject, and it is confronting what we talk about, they're too busy. And as a parent myself, I know where their head is at, and you just hope for the best, and it's all too much to take in. But it is absolutely vital that parents know what their kids are doing online, because parents are getting hurt. Yeah. And I often see parents who come to my talks who say, I'm here because a terrible, terrible thing happened to my child. Yeah. And why should you wait until a terrible, terrible thing happens to your child or a family member before you educate yourself on what you could have done to actually prevent that from happening? It could have been as simple as setting up a password on your phone to stop your toddler from getting in there and seeing some horrific thing on your phone. If you'd done that, you would have saved your child from that harm. And it's interesting that I had a very good response to my last webinar from parents showing up, and I think it's a sign of the times, to be honest. I think it's just also the convenience factor of them being able to quickly get the kids fed, bathed, all that kind of stuff. They don't have to find babysitters, and they can just sit down for an hour in front of their computers that they've probably already been doing.
And do you find a better time to do that with parents during the day? Like, do you find mornings, afternoons, or evenings are better to do that with your parents?
I was told, I did a poll to find out.
And what did you poll?
And the parents overwhelmingly said after 8 o'clock. So
after
8 o'clock,
8 o'clock at night?
Yeah, because that's when because that everything was done and everything was settled. It didn't work for those parents that were in Perth and they were 3 hours behind because that was dinner time. But in my time zone, that was the most convenient time for them to do it overall. So I'm asking parents what they want. It's a bit like when I go into schools and asking kids, what do you want to know about? What do you want to learn? What are the things that are bugging you? And it's the same with parents. Ask the parents, what do they want? What's worrying them? Then you can look at whether you can help them with those subjects rather than just, telling them what you think they need to know.
Well, what sets me up for this last question that I have for you, what are your final thoughts specific to social media safety and digital literacy while we navigate this ever-changing world and the events that are happening? So really good way to kind of end our discussion. What are some of your thoughts?
Well, I think I still have to, my main thoughts are we need to give children safe places to report. The eSafety Commissioner over here did a survey last year that showed only 52% of kids would ever tell a caring adult when something happened to them online, and some people are saying they think it's less than that, and that means they're not getting help. That means they're dealing with it alone, and it's exacerbated by kids that are dealing with this alone in their own bedrooms because their parents are thinking they need that privacy in order for them to do their work or whatever, and the child is dealing with with these issues on their own, and that's really unfair. And the other part of it is that I think developers and have to start putting privacy and safety first for users and simplicity. We need to get everybody online. I have an 87-year-old father who is almost self-isolating at the moment at home, and my sister taught him how to use FaceTime the other day. I've tried using FaceTime. It's the simplest thing that we can interact with him.
Yeah.
We need to make it simple so that everyone has access to this technology, not just people that have good internet, who have a good device, who are able to navigate this. And how to teach those people to use it is really, really hard. Telling a senior, a person over the age of 70, to get online and watch a webinar is ridiculous.
Yeah.
When they don't even know how to open a browser, it's or how to open an email.
Can you just say browser for me one more time?
Browser.
I love it. I absolutely love it. I just
there you
love
go.
it.
Did my best Aussie accent. So my thinking is that we need to start focusing to get the safety that we want people to have. It has to be user friendly. It has to be safety by design to start with. We need to make these companies accountable for what they're doing in every aspect. And if they don't and they step out of line, then there's a price to pay. And it has to be a decent price, not some parking ticket, fine that they're getting. It has to be something that really forces companies to make things safe for everybody to use.
You sure you don't have a little bit of law enforcement or policing or judicial background in your genes somewhere? Because you're absolutely right.
I'm too old, Darren. I'm too old. I've seen this stuff.
You look like you're 25. What do you mean you're too old? What are you talking about?
Look, you and I grew up during the era where seatbelts were mandatory. Now, how many times were we told before that, seatbelts save lives, put seatbelt in your car? The only time people actually really all went out and got seatbelts was when they were going to be fined.
Yeah.
It didn't matter how many times we showed them pictures of, crash test dummies going through windscreens. They had to be fined. Yeah. Same with car seats, same with human beings are like that. We all think we're the one person that doesn't need to follow the rules or to take things seriously or to buy insurance or whatever it might be. And we've got this magical thinking around eSafety and cyber safety that'll never happen to our families. And that breaks my heart every time a parent comes to me and tells me that their child's been absolutely damaged or hurt by something online that could have simply been resolved by the parent knowing that they had to tick this box, or the developer making things so a child could never access that website.
Like I've always said, if there's no consequences to actions, significant consequences to actions, then what's the impetus for change, especially in the industry right now that treat us more as a commodity, as the product, than an actual customer, right? Which is really
exactly
cool. I loved our conversation. Stick around because I want to talk to you a little bit at the end of here. But just in closing, again, I want to thank Leonie for participating in today's Q&A back and forth, hear about what's going on in their country and what's going on here as well, and a lot of insights that I've learned from her that I'm going to sit back and look a little deeper and look into. But for those of you, check out her website. It'll be on the feed that we're going to give you later. Go and have a look at her material. She's got a ton of material on there that is free and available for you to look at. And as I always say, if I don't know the answer to a question, I know somebody who does. And I turned to Leonie last year over an issue, and she helped me out spectacularly. Like she really did. It was amazing. And she didn't know me from anybody, just because we met on Twitter, right? Kind of cool. So in closing, again, thank you very much for tuning into today's session. I had a really good time, and I look forward to next week's. Let's see, I've had somebody from Ireland, I've had somebody from England, I've had somebody from Australia. I think I'm gonna have to pick another Commonwealth country. I don't know which one yet, but I'll think of something from somebody somewhere, and I look forward to next week's discussion. So on behalf of myself, Brandon, who's working all the magic behind the scenes, and the rest of the White Hatter team, I thank you all for tuning in today, and I look forward to our next Thinkable Thursday. Have a great rest of the day.